The Adventure of the Midnight Express to Edinburgh. It was a raw, foggy evening in November of 1895 when my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves hurrying through the crowded halls of 221B Baker Street. The fire burned low in the grate, and the familiar strains of Holmes's violin had only just ceased when the bell rang with unusual violence. Our visitor proved to be none other than Sir Reginald Hargreaves, a high official in the Foreign Office whose name was known to me only through the occasional paragraph in the Times. He was a tall, portly gentleman with a ruddy complexion, now pale with anxiety, and his gloved hands trembled as he clutched a dispatch case to his breast. "Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "I have come to beg your assistance in a matter that touches the very safety of the realm." Holmes motioned him to a chair and resumed his own seat, his thin, eager face framed by the lamplight. "Pray be precise, Sir Reginald," said he. "Time, I perceive, is of the essence." The baronet needed no second bidding. In terse sentences he explained that he was entrusted with the delivery of a sealed diplomatic pouch containing the draft terms of a secret naval understanding between Britain and Russia, terms which, if made public prematurely or delivered into hostile hands, might plunge half of Europe into turmoil. The papers must reach the Russian ambassador in Edinburgh by dawn the following day, for a conference of the utmost delicacy was to take place. "I dare not trust the ordinary post," continued Sir Reginald, "nor even the usual diplomatic channels, for we have reason to believe that certain agents, foreign agents, are already aware of the pouch's existence. I am therefore travelling north tonight upon the midnight express from King's Cross, the celebrated Flying Scotsman special, which reaches Edinburgh without stop. I shall be accompanied by my private secretary, Mr. Felix Harrow, but 2 men alone are scarcely sufficient safeguard against determined villainy. Will you, Mr. Holmes? Will you and Dr. Watson undertake to escort me?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with that characteristic sparkle which told me the chase was to his taste. "I shall be delighted," he replied. "The problem presents several points of interest. We shall join you on the platform at King's Cross within the hour." Sir Reginald expressed his profound relief, arranged the details of our meeting, and departed as abruptly as he had come. Scarcely had the door closed behind him when Holmes sprang to his feet and began filling his travelling valise with the energy of a man who scents adventure. "Come, Watson," he cried. "Pack your revolver and your warmest ulster, for we shall have a bitter night upon the rails. I confess I have long wished to examine the possibilities of crime upon one of these modern, non-stop expresses. The confined space, the locked compartments, the impossibility of escape, here, if anywhere, is the perfect setting for ingenuity, either criminal or detective." An hour later we stood upon the vast, echoing platform of King's Cross, amid swirling fog and the hiss of steam. The great locomotive of the midnight special loomed before us, its huge driving wheels gleaming, its funnel already belching sparks into the night. Porters hurried to and fro with luggage, and the air was filled with the shouts of guards and the slamming of doors. Sir Reginald and his pale, nervous secretary awaited us beside a first-class carriage near the centre of the train. Brief introductions were made to the other passengers who were to share our portion of the coach. The Countess Natalia Voronova, a strikingly beautiful woman wrapped in sables, Mr. Angus MacRae, a dour Scottish laird with a beard like a bird's nest, and Professor James Blackwood, a mild, bespectacled mathematician buried in a sheaf of calculations. At last the guard's whistle shrilled, the engine gave a mighty exhaust, and with a jerk the midnight express to Edinburgh glided out into the darkness, carrying with it secrets enough to shake empires and, as we were soon to discover, treachery of the blackest dye. No sooner had the lights of London faded into the mist behind us than the great express settled into its relentless rhythm. The wheels beat a steady tattoo upon the rails, and the carriage swayed gently as we thundered northward through the sleeping countryside. The fog pressed close against the windows, turning the glass into opaque mirrors, in which one caught fleeting glimpses of one's fellow passengers beneath the dim glow of the gas lamps. Holmes and I had secured a small first-class compartment near the centre of the coach, but the walls were thin and the sounds of the train carried every murmur from the corridor. Sir Reginald Hargreaves and his secretary, Mr. Harrow, occupied the compartment immediately opposite ours. The remaining travellers were distributed along the same carriage. The Countess Voronova in solitary splendour at one end, Mr. Angus McCrae growling over a flask of whisky in another, and Professor Blackwood absorbed in his eternal calculations beneath a green-shaded reading lamp. I confess that, after the bustle of departure, I felt the pleasant drowsiness that comes from a warm carriage and the measured pulse of a fast train. Holmes, however, was all alertness. He sat opposite me with his long legs stretched out, his deerstalker hat upon the rack above, and his keen eyes glancing restlessly from the fog-shrouded window to the corridor beyond our half-open door. "You observe our companions, Watson," he remarked presently in a low voice. "I've noticed them, certainly," I replied. "A varied assortment. The Countess is remarkably handsome." Holmes gave a short, amused chuckle. "A fact which has not escaped you, I see. Yet beauty is often the most effective of disguises. Mark how she sits, perfectly composed, yet her right hand never strays far from the jewelled reticule upon her lap. A woman accustomed to danger, I fancy." "And the Scotsman?" "McCrae is what he appears. A blunt border lad returning home after selling cattle in Smithfield. His distrust of foreigners is genuine, and his boots bear the honest mud of the London markets. He is no plotter." "And the Professor?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Ah, there we touch upon interesting ground. Professor Blackwood is known to me by reputation, one of the foremost mathematicians of his generation. His presence on this particular train, scribbling equations concerning vibrational harmonics and tensile stress upon moving bodies, is suggestive." Before I could press him further, the door of our compartment slid open and the Countess Voronova stood framed in the aperture. The swaying of the carriage caused her to steady herself with one gloved hand, and the lamplight caught the brilliance of her dark eyes. "Forgive the intrusion, gentlemen," she said in excellent English, touched with the faintest Slavic lilt. "The solitude of travel grows wearisome. Might I join you for a little while?" Holmes rose instantly and offered her his own seat with a bow. "We should be honoured, madam." She settled herself with graceful economy of movement, and for some minutes we conversed upon indifferent topics: the fog, the speed of the express, the comfort of the new corridor trains. Yet I noticed that her gaze strayed often toward the compartment opposite, where Sir Reginald and his secretary sat in close conversation. Presently the conductor passed along the corridor, announcing that the dining car was open for light refreshment. The Countess excused herself with a smile, and Holmes watched her retreating figure thoughtfully. "A charming woman," I remarked. "Undoubtedly," said Holmes dryly, "and one who knows precisely where the diplomatic pouch is kept. Did you observe how her eyes measured the chain upon Sir Reginald's wrist as she passed their door?" I confessed I had noticed no such thing. Holmes leaned forward. "Depend upon it, Watson, we are carrying more than mere passengers upon this train. Somewhere among them is an agent who knows the value of those papers. The game has begun. The hours slipped by. The train rushed through Grantham and York without pause, the engines whistled, shrieking occasionally into the night. From time to time I dozed, lulled by the motion, only to wake and find Holmes still wakeful, his sharp profile etched against the window as he stared into the rushing darkness. It must have been shortly after 2 o'clock as we sped through the desolate stretches north of York that the peace of our journey was shattered. A sudden cry rang out along the corridor. A cry of alarm quickly stifled, followed by the hurried patter of footsteps. Holmes was on his feet in an instant. "Come, Watson," he exclaimed. "The curtain rises upon our little drama." Holmes's words were scarcely uttered when the door of the compartment opposite ours was flung open with violence. Mr. Felix Harrow, the young secretary, stumbled into the corridor, his face ashen and his eyes starting from his head. "Help!" he gasped. "Sir Reginald, he is dead, murdered." In an instant, Holmes was across the corridor, I close upon his heels. The other passengers appeared at their doors almost simultaneously, the Countess pale but composed, Macrae muttering fierce oaths beneath his breath, and Professor Blackwood blinking in bewilderment behind his spectacles. The compartment occupied by Sir Reginald and his secretary was a small one, containing 2 seats facing each other and a narrow door leading to the corridor. The door had been locked from the inside, as Harrow insisted, and he had been forced to open it with the duplicate key supplied by the guard. The single window was closed and fastened by the safety bar. There was no communication with adjoining compartments, for this was one of the older corridor coaches. Sir Reginald Hargreaves lay slumped in the corner seat nearest the window, his head fallen forward upon his breast. A dark stain spread across the front of his waistcoat, and when Holmes gently raised the body, we saw the small, neat wound directly over the heart from which the blood had welled. The man was quite dead. The body had already begun to cool. Most singular of all, the diplomatic pouch, which but 2 hours earlier had been chained securely to Sir Reginald's left wrist, was gone. The chain itself lay upon the floor, severed cleanly as though with a file or heavy nippers. Yet no weapon of any kind was to be found in the compartment, nor any trace of the missing pouch. Holmes dropped to one knee and examined the scene with that intense concentration which I knew so well. His magnifying glass flashed beneath the gas lamp as he scrutinized the wound, the severed chain, the carpet, and even the window fastenings. "Stabbed with a narrow triangular blade," he murmured, "inflicted with great precision and force. Death must have been almost instantaneous, yet there is very little blood. Curious. And observe, Watson, these faint traces of coal dust upon the cuffs of the deceased's coat, and a similar smudge upon the seat beside him." He straightened and turned to the trembling secretary. "Mr. Harrow, you were sharing this compartment. Pray tell us exactly what occurred." Harrow passed a hand across his brow. "We sat talking until perhaps 1 o'clock, he said unsteadily. Sir Reginald was anxious about the papers, and we reviewed certain instructions together. After that I dozed, only lightly, you understand. I woke suddenly to find the lamp turned low and Sir Reginald slumped as you see him. I called his name, touched his hand. It was cold. Then I saw the blood and the broken chain. I cried out and rushed for help." "Did you hear no sound, no struggle?" "None whatever. The roar of the train drowns everything." Holmes glanced at the lock. The door was locked from the inside. "Yes, Sir Reginald's precaution. He locked it when we retired and kept the key in his waistcoat pocket." "And the window?" "Fastened, as you see. It has not been opened." The guard and conductor had now arrived, summoned by the commotion. They stood in the doorway gazing in helpless dismay at the scene. "We cannot stop the train, sir," the guard explained to Holmes. "This is the non-stop Edinburgh Express. Our next halt is Waverley Station itself, at 8 o'clock. Holmes's lips tightened into that grim line I had seen before in moments of crisis. "Very well," said he. "The murderer is still aboard, and the stolen papers likewise. Until dawn we are upon an iron prison rushing through the night at 50 miles an hour. There can be no escape for the criminal, nor, I fear, for his pursuers." He turned to the assembled passengers, his voice crisp and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, a most serious crime has been committed in your midst. I must ask you all to remain within this carriage and to submit to such questions as I may put. The train will reach Edinburgh in little more than 5 hours. Until then, we are thrown entirely upon our own resources." A murmur arose, Macrae's deep growl loudest among it, but no one protested openly. The Countess had sunk into a seat in the corridor, her face very white. Professor Blackwood stared at the body, as though it were some abstruse problem in geometry. Holmes bent once more over the dead man, his long fingers moving swiftly. Suddenly he paused, his nostrils dilating. "Watson," he said in a low voice, "do you catch it? A faint odour, very faint, yet unmistakable to one who has encountered it in the Amazonian jungles." I bent closer. Beneath the metallic tang of blood there was indeed a suggestion of something bitter and aromatic. "Bitter almonds," I whispered. "Precisely. Not prussic acid, but something closely allied. Curious. Most curious." He rose and surveyed the narrow compartment once more, his eyes alight with that fierce excitement which danger alone could kindle in him. "The game, Watson," he said softly, "is fairly afoot, and upon ground where no criminal has ever before been hunted. A murder in a locked compartment upon a train that cannot stop. Here, if ever, we shall see what pure deduction can achieve." The guard, having secured the murdered man's compartment with his master key, cleared the corridor as best he could in that confined space. The passengers were requested to gather in the dining car, a narrow saloon 2 coaches forward, where a few cold refreshments still stood upon the tables beneath their white cloths. The train rushed onward with undiminished speed, the rhythm of the wheels, a constant reminder that we were prisoners of time and motion until Edinburgh should be reached. Holmes moved among our fellow travellers with that quiet authority which none could resist. He requested each in turn to relate his or her movements since the train's departure, and though the questions appeared casual, I knew that every glance, every hesitation was being catalogued in that marvellous brain. First to be examined was Mr. Felix Harrow, the secretary, who still trembled from the shock of his discovery. "I have told you all I know, Mr. Holmes," he repeated. "Sir Reginald and I spoke together until late. I dozed, and when I awoke, he was as you found him." Holmes regarded him thoughtfully. "You observed no one enter or leave your compartment?" "No one. The door was locked." "And you yourself did not leave it at any time?" Harrow coloured. "Only once, to visit the lavatory at the end of the corridor, perhaps half an hour before the discovery. I was absent no more than 3 minutes." Holmes nodded and passed on. The Countess Voronova sat very upright, her hands folded in her lap. When Holmes turned to her, she met his gaze steadily. "I retired early to my compartment," she said in her soft, foreign tones. "I read for a while, then slept. I heard nothing until Mr. Harrow's cry." Holmes's eyes fell upon her gloved hands. "Madam, there appears to be a small spot upon your right glove, dark and still damp." She glanced down without flinching. "Ah, yes. An apple. I cut it with my little fruit knife not an hour ago. The juice is sometimes dark." "Might I see the knife?" With a faint smile, she opened her reticule and produced a slender blade of foreign workmanship. Holmes examined it closely beneath the lamp, then returned it with a bow. Mr. Angus Macrae was less composed. He stood with his back to the window, his bearded face flushed with indignation. "This is outrage," he growled. "A man murdered scarce 20 feet from where I sat, and I heard naught. But I'll tell you this, Mr. Detective. If it's a foreigner's work, as smells likely, you'll find yon Russian woman at the bottom of it. I've no trust for her fine airs." Holmes regarded the Scotsman with mild amusement. "Your boots, Mr. Macrae, bear traces of coal dust upon the soles, quite fresh." McCrae stared down in surprise. Coal dust? Aye, well, I stepped out onto the open vestibule between carriages earlier in the evening for a breath of air. The tender's just ahead of us. A bit of grit is only natural. Professor Blackwood proved the least communicative. He blinked vaguely when questioned, as though recalled from some distant calculation. I have been working, he said, indicating a notebook filled with cryptic symbols. Vibrational frequencies induced by rapid motion upon rigid bodies. I noticed nothing of the affairs of my fellow passengers. Holmes took the notebook with permission and glanced through it. His eyebrow arched slightly. Most interesting, Professor. You have here a sketch of our train's layout, with particular attention to the coal tender and the engine's water intake schedule. The mathematician looked startled. Merely data for my calculations. The non-stop run provides unique opportunities for observing continuous stress. Holmes handed the book back with a courteous word and drew me aside. What do you make of it, Watson? He asked in a low voice. It seems impossible, I replied. A man stabbed in a locked compartment, the weapon vanished, the pouch gone. Yet no one could have entered or left without being seen in the corridor. Exactly, said Holmes, his eyes gleaming. And yet the thing was done. Observe the clues we have. Coal dust upon the victim's cuffs and upon McCrae's boots. A faint trail of the same dust leading along the corridor toward the rear of the train. The odour of a rare paralytic upon the body, and the severed chain cut with a tool rather than broken. He paced the narrow saloon like a caged panther. The train itself is the key, Watson. We must think not as upon stationary ground, but upon a moving world 60 feet in length, rushing through darkness. The murderer has used the train's own motion and structure to accomplish what seems impossible. Suddenly he stopped. The coal tender! Come, Watson. We have no time to lose. He turned to the guard. Is it possible to pass forward to the engine? The man hesitated. It's against regulation, sir, but in such circumstances, the vestibules are open between carriages, though it's perilous with the train at full speed. Holmes's jaw set. Peril is preferable to ignorance. Lead on. As we moved toward the forward door of the dining car, a fresh wave of rain lashed the windows, and the train plunged into a tunnel, plunging us momentarily into roaring darkness. When the lamps flickered back, Holmes's face wore that expression of intense concentration, which told me the scent was growing hot. The pouch is still aboard, he said quietly, and so is the murderer. But unless we act swiftly, both may vanish at the one brief moment when escape becomes possible. The guard's warning was no exaggeration. To pass from carriage to carriage upon a train travelling at full speed through the night is an undertaking to tax the strongest nerve. The open vestibules between the coaches gaped like black pits. The rain-lashed wind howled through them, and the footplates lurched sickeningly with every sway of the train. Yet Holmes led the way without hesitation. Clutching the brass handrails, we stepped out into the storm. The roar of the engine ahead was deafening, and sparks from the funnel whirled past us in fiery streaks. One by one, the guard, Holmes, myself, and finally the conductor, we fought our way forward along the swaying chain of carriages until we reached the foremost passenger coach. Beyond it lay only the tender heaped high with coal, and then the engine itself. Holmes paused at the forward door and turned to me, his voice barely audible above the tumult. The pouch is in the tender, Watson, concealed beneath the coal. The murderer intends to recover it when the engine takes water at the secret siding just south of the border. We have perhaps 20 minutes before that stop. How can you know this? I shouted back. The coal dust upon the victim's cuffs. He was in the tender earlier, hiding the pouch himself. The irregular vibrations noted by Professor Blackwood. The brief unexplained slowdowns. These were signals from an accomplice trackside confirming the plan. But the accomplice will not wait if the train arrives without the expected lantern signal. We must reach the tender before the siding. He swung open the door and stepped out onto the narrow running board that skirted the tender. The great heap of coal loomed black against the flying sparks, and the engine's firebox glowed like a furnace ahead. Rain slashed sideways, soaking us in an instant, and the footplate bucked beneath our feet. Holmes climbed nimbly onto the tender's side, his tall figure silhouetted against the storm. I followed as best I could, my service revolver in one hand, grasping the iron rim with the other. The guard and conductor remained below, shouting encouragement we could scarcely hear. Holmes plunged his hands into the coal near the forward edge and began casting lumps aside with furious energy. I joined him, and in moments we had cleared a space near the water filler pipe. There, half buried, lay the diplomatic pouch, intact, its seals unbroken. But we were not alone. A dark figure rose suddenly from the far side of the tender, black with coal dust, a heavy spanner raised to strike. For an instant I scarcely recognized the features beneath the grime. Then, with a shock, I saw that it was Sir Reginald Hargreaves himself, alive and glaring at us with the fury of a cornered beast. "Stand back," he snarled, his voice almost lost in the wind. "The papers are mine." Holmes straightened, unmoved by the threat. "Yours to deliver to your Russian paymasters, Sir Reginald. A pretty plot, but it has failed." Hargreaves sprang forward with a cry of rage. The spanner whistled past Holmes's head as my friend ducked with that cat-like swiftness I had seen before. I levelled my revolver, but in that heaving, rain-slick space I dared not fire for fear of hitting Holmes. The two men grappled upon the swaying tender, sliding perilously amid the shifting coal. Hargreaves was a heavy man, and desperation lent him strength, but Holmes's lean frame was wire and whipcord. A swift twist, a sudden thrust, and the traitor lost his footing. He clawed wildly at the edge, but the coal gave way beneath him, and with a shout he slid down the sloping side toward the rushing track below. Holmes caught his wrist just in time. For a long moment the two hung there, Hargreaves dangling above the sleepers that flashed beneath us at 50 miles an hour. Holmes braced against the tender's rim, his face set like granite. "Yield, Sir Reginald," he called. "Your game is up." The man's grip weakened. His face was livid with terror and defeat. At last he gasped, "I yield." With the guard's aid, we hauled him back onto the tender and secured his wrists with his own handcuffs, part of the equipment he had carried for his pretended protection of the pouch. He lay panting amid the coal, a broken man. As we made our perilous way back to the passenger carriages, the first pale streak of dawn showed in the east. The rain had ceased and the storm was rolling away southward. The train swept on toward Edinburgh, its secret safe and its traitor taken. Holmes wiped coal dust from his hands and gave me one of his rare smiles. "A brisk night's work, Watson," said he, "and one, I fancy, that the Foreign Office will not soon forget." We returned to the passenger carriage, wet, grimy and triumphant, dragging the dishevelled figure of Sir Reginald Hargreaves between us. The passengers, who had remained huddled in the dining car under the watchful eye of the conductor, rose in astonishment as we entered. Mr. Harrow's face turned a yet paler shade. The Countess pressed a hand to her lips, and even the stolid Macrae let out a low whistle of amazement. Holmes pushed the traitor into a seat and stood over him, his lean figure swaying easily with the motion of the train. "Sir Reginald Hargreaves," he said in cold, clear tones, "you have played a bold game, but it is ended. The diplomatic pouch is recovered, and your accomplices upon the line will wait in vain for the signal that will never come." Hargreaves glared up at him, his former pomposity stripped away, leaving only sullen defiance. "How did you know?" he muttered. Holmes addressed the company at large, his voice carrying easily over the rumble of the wheels. The affair, though daring, was built upon a chain of deductions any careful observer might have followed. From the first, I suspected that the danger to the papers came not from without, but from within. Sir Reginald's anxiety at Baker Street was admirably counterfeited, yet certain small details betrayed him. The chain upon his wrist was fastened with a lock of foreign manufacture, Russian in fact, and his cuffs bore traces of coal dust, even before we boarded the train. The supposed murder was a clever illusion. The wound upon the victim, who was in reality the unfortunate Mr. Harrow, drugged into deep unconsciousness, was inflicted with a collapsible rubber dagger charged with pig's blood. A tiny capsule of a rare South American paralytic, derived from curare, was introduced into the blood to produce the odor of bitter almonds, and to ensure that any superficial examination would pronounce death immediate. The chain was severed by Sir Reginald himself before he concealed the pouch in the tender and covered himself with coal dust. Mr. Harrow, waking to find his employer apparently slain and the pouch vanished, reacted exactly as planned. He raised the alarm, focusing all suspicion upon the other passengers. Sir Reginald intended to slip from the tender during the brief unscheduled stop at the remote siding, recover the pouch and vanish into the hills with his confederates. Several lesser clues confirm the solution: the trail of coal dust along the corridor, the irregular slowdowns of the train, false signals given by lantern from the permanent way. Professor Blackwood's innocent calculations of vibration and speed, which allowed me to determine our exact position and the timing of the intended halt. Even the Countess's fruit knife and Mr. Macrae's grumbles, useful red herrings that distracted us from the true culprit. The game was ingenious, Sir Reginald, but it overlooked one factor: that Sherlock Holmes was aboard. Hargreaves sank back in his seat, all fight gone from him. "I might have succeeded had you not been summoned," he said bitterly. "Perhaps," replied Holmes with a shrug, "but treason is a gamble in which the stakes are always high." Mr. Harrow, revived with brandy and the guard's assistance, confirmed the details when he was able to speak. How Sir Reginald had persuaded him to take a draught against sleeplessness, after which he remembered nothing until waking to confusion and horror. The Countess, who had been wholly innocent, expressed her relief with charming grace. Macrae clapped Holmes upon the shoulder with a force that might have felled a lesser man, and Professor Blackwood murmured that the entire episode would provide invaluable data for a paper upon human unpredictability in closed systems. As the train thundered across the Great Forth Bridge, the sun rose clear and red over the Firth, gilding the waters below and bathing the ancient city of Edinburgh in rosy light. The long night of treachery and pursuit was ended, and we stepped onto the platform at Waverley Station with the satisfaction of a task accomplished. Sir Reginald was handed at once into the custody of waiting officials from the Foreign Office and the Scottish police, a silent, broken figure who offered no further resistance. The diplomatic pouch, its seals intact, was delivered into the ambassador's own hands before the morning was far advanced. Holmes refused all thanks with his usual modesty, declaring that the credit belonged to the logic of the facts rather than to any individual. "Yet I confess, Watson," he remarked as we sat at breakfast in our hotel overlooking Princes Street, "that the affair possessed a certain unique charm. Crime upon a non-stop express. There is a neatness, an economy of means that appeals to the artist in me. One day, when your notebooks are open to the public, this little adventure may serve to remind the world that even upon the iron highway of modern progress, villainy cannot outrun justice when pursued by reason." I could only agree, for as I looked out upon the noble outline of the Castle Rock against the winter sky, I felt that no setting could have been more fitting for the triumph of my friend's unrivaled powers. Thus ended the affair of the Midnight Express to Edinburgh. A tale of treachery, yes, but also of the unyielding vigilance that guards the safety of the realm. Your faithful friend, John H. Watson, M.D.